Do you have the gift of gab and like talking about interesting topics? Are you often called opinionated by your friends and family? Then come to Anchor where you can be all of the above and get paid for it. Along with being one of the easiest systems to create contact with, Anchor supplies everything you need and can be used from your smartphone or computer. They even distribute your content for you so that you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. Just download the Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. Okay. So hello, Internet family. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib, and you are listening to 31 Days of Global Feminism. So today, this is going to be the first of 4 recordings on this particular topic. So this topic comes courtesy of Feminista Jones, Reclaiming Our Space, which is going to be which is Bookworm, my book blog Bookworm. It is our book of the month, so I'm continuing to keep that club going. Like I said, Adam's Rib Media Ministry isn't going anywhere. It still exists and is still very much alive and kicking. So I happened to be reading the back of her book, and I thought, I'm looking at the women of the Combahee collective. I'm like, this sounds like it might be interesting. So let me go look this information up. And so what the information that I'm giving you once again is courtesy of Wikipedia. The name of the excuse me, Lord have mercy. The name of the movement is the Combahee River Collective, and I'm also going to give each of these women their own podcast to discuss the women who spearheaded this. So the Combahee River Collective was a black feminist lesbian socialist organization that was active in Boston from 1974 to 1980. The collective argued that both the white feminist movement and the civil rights movement were not addressing their particular needs as black women, and more specifically as black lesbians. So I'm saying this not because, like I said before, I'm 100% straight, only into penis and only into people with kickstands. So some of the women that you saw that with years prior when I was doing 28 to 29 days of black feminism, depending on whether or not it's a leap year or not, and also with 31 days of global feminism for Women's History Month. So the reason why even though I'm a born again Christian, and we know that Christianity teaches against homosexuality, I go ahead and continue to out of my notables, I have not excluded lesbians, is because number one, even though all lesbians are not feminists, and all feminists are not lesbian. And it's also to address the whole issue of intersectionality and how a person can be oppressed on more than one issue in their life. So I'm going to be revisiting intersectionality because I'm also going to talk about the woman who is responsible for the term intersectionality. And so as we talk about that, we notice in feminism that many women are oppressed on a lot of different levels. There's the whole intersection. The whole intersection between being female but also being black, and then when you add to that, there's also the whole issue of not operating in heteronormative practices in your love life. So you may be struggling, and believe it or not, in the world of Christianity, many times when people have same-sex issues, especially women and men, or really both, there's a bit of a silent suffering that comes. It's enough that you kind of suffer silently as a black person. I don't know if you have listened to the conflict or watched the footage of the conflict in the Ukraine. I still support the Ukraine citizens for fighting to protect their property. I just recently thought about that, and I'm like, Russia, we couldn't trust Russia back in the 80s. And people can say, well, if Donald Trump were in here, this wouldn't be going on. Well, Donald Trump I didn't trust his association with Putin already anyway, because greedy people just, have a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. But one thing that has been added to the whole Ukraine situation is the issue of racism. And I'm going to talk about that this week. I will be posting about it. And I don't think the answer is to withdraw support and flip over to the Russian side, because that would just be adding to the sufferings of our African brothers and sisters that are over there. But I will say, with our support for Ukraine, I'm gonna need some of them people to be allowed to not be having to exit by foot. They need to have the same access to escape as the white citizens have. You cannot be accepting help and still treating people of color like second-class citizens. That's just not cool. So to me, they need to be, there's some accountability needs to take place. Period. So as you can see, not only are they having to deal with the whole issue, so the black citizens in the Ukraine not only have to deal with the whole issue of racism in the Ukraine all by itself, but now because they're in the Ukraine, and from what I hear, there's students and different other stuff. Not only do they have to worry about their safety because Russia is now attacking, which I hate, but also they're having to deal with, that's like somebody coming for the United States, and not only do you have to worry about your safety because an outside person has attacked, and we have been attacked. 911 was an attack. But let's say in the middle of everything, and you're trying to get everybody to safe places, and I'm not gonna say it hasn't happened here. All of a sudden, somebody's racism shows up, and I thought about that last night. I said, why do, it's funny how white people have accused black people over the years in the fight for human rights and civil rights of, well, you're making everything about race. I said, because it keeps showing up. In the middle of all this, you still in the middle of all of this conflict, and Comedy Hype has, did a post about it on YouTube. In the middle of all of this melee, as you're trying to get the women and children, and one person, and I went to someone's live on, and I posted it. Someone did a conference or a live on Twitter. If you're familiar with Twitter, then you know that they are giving people the ability to conference on Twitter. And it's interesting, when I get to the point where I'm able to do that, I look forward to doing it, because I think it's going to be interesting. But another issue with intersectionality is, not only are you being attacked by Russia, but in the midst of the attack, these people couldn't find a way to put their differences aside and come together for the good of the people there. And a woman, I don't know if her little meme or whatever looked white, and she comes to this guy's thing, And she says, well, is it really about race? There will always, in the midst of everything that you see, no matter how much footage you see, there will always be some tone deaf white person that shows up and says, um, is it really about race? Or from what I'm seeing now, I saw the footage the day before where they talked about, I think the men from like ages 18 to like 65 are staying behind to fight for the country, but they're sending the women and the children on to get out of the area so that they can get to a safe place. So I knew what she was talking about, but I was just like, it's obvious that the people that are being fought are not only men. It's obvious when you see the footage that it isn't just men being fought, that, well, trying to make black men look as though they're running from the fight. And that's not what's going on. It's women and children and everybody, like they're making these people walk. And so I'm like, okay. So luckily, I've researched some more and saw where there were, and once again, black women at the forefront. Artist Lenny Kravitz has also said, you can come to his Instagram and find information if you are wanting to support the people of color that are going through things over there, because what they're basically are saying is, yeah, our modes of transportation, our trains, our buses, you cannot use those. You have to walk to safety. Now, does all that sound familiar? Can we go back to Hurricane Katrina, where the people of color felt like they were being treated badly through the whole thing with the infamous Kanye West with George Bush doesn't care about black people? And I'm saying, you mean to tell me in the midst of all this hell, you still found like, it would be one thing if we could say, well, even though there's racism, and there is racism in Ukraine, I just looked up the information, there is a lot of racism. I'm like, you mean to tell me in the middle of all of this, when lives are being threatened and civilians are being attacked, you still found a way to show your behind? And then after the whole thing and the dust is settled, you will then say, well, you're making everything about race, because it keeps showing up. It keeps showing up. And I'm like the people on Comedy Central, Comedy Hype, I'm not shocked. And so was I shocked? Part of me was just like, really? In the middle of all this, you still finding a way to show your behinds? Yes, I'm talking about foreign white people, but let's face it, it's a few tone deaf mugs up in here. One thing I will say for America, most of the time, we usually do find a way to put our differences aside and come together, because when it's all said and done, that doesn't matter. But sometimes, but not all the time. I'm not gonna give us that much credit. So anyway, back to the whole issue, back to this collective. So racism was present in the mainstream feminist movement, while Delaney and Mandit Protas argue that much of the civil rights movement had a sexist and homophobic reputation. The collective, so let me go ahead and open this link up. So the collective are perhaps best known for developing the Combahee River Collective Statement, a key document in the history of contemporary black feminism and the development of the concepts of identity politics as used amongst political organizers and social theorists. and for introducing the concept of interlocking systems of feminism, of oppression, a key concept I just touched on, of intersectionality. Gerald Eisenberg credits the 1977 Combahee statement with the first use of the phrase identity politics. So, identity politics is a political approach wherein people of a particular gender, religion, race, social background, and social class environment, and other identifying factors develop political agendas that are based on these identities. We saw a little bit of that with the whole Whoopi Goldberg situation, where she said the Holocaust was not about race, and so that it was actually about man's inhumanity to man. And so I won't say I don't agree with that statement, because I do believe that it was about race, because Hebrews or Jews are a race of people, but I believe it was both. I believe it was both race and man's inhumanity to man. So she wasn't completely wrong, just very misinformed about whether or not Jews, because in this country, because we have freedom of religion, we tend to think of Jews as a religion. However, if you picked up any Bibles or did any research, you will know that they are a race or ethnicity as well. So it's both, and I will talk about that. Like I said before, this will be the best one. This is going to be the most unusual, but the best Women's History Month, because I'm not just going to talk about notables. I am going to talk about issues within feminism, especially when we're talking about women's rights. So the term is used in a variety of ways to describe phenomena such as multiculturalism, women's movements, civil rights, lesbian and gay movements, and regional separatist movements. And I only bring that up because it was an issue of not knowing how to identify a particular group of people. Okay. I also admonish people to read the Old Testament, because our Old Testament is actually their holy book. Because remember, many of them, there are what they call Messianic Jews. And a Messianic Jew is a Jew that acknowledged that Jesus is the Messiah, but yet they still observe the high holy days. And the high holy days, if you examine the different celebrations, they actually they are actually what people who operate in the prophetic would say, types and shadows. So types and shadows in the Old Testament are celebrations that point to the first coming of Christ. So in the Second Testament, or the New Testament, which born again Christians acknowledge as the second half of our holy book, which is the Holy Bible, there are types and shadows that point, especially when Jesus preaches out of in the parables and what they call the parabolic. Most of the parables are not only to demonstrate the kingdom of God and how God feels about his people and mankind, which is his creation, but it also points to the second coming of Christ and what we call the consummation of the age. And that would be the what they call the second coming, when Jesus raptures his bride, which is the church, out of the earth. So let me get back to this, because I feel a preach coming on. So through writing their statement, the CRC connected themselves to the activist tradition of black women in the 19th century and to the struggles of black liberation in the 60s. So now we're going to go into National Black Feminist Organization. Author Barbara Smith and two other delegates attending the first regional meeting of the National Black Feminist Organization in New York City provided the groundwork for and I'm going to talk about Ms. Smith on another podcast, provided the groundwork for the Combahee River Collective with their efforts to build a NBFO chapter in Boston. The NBFO was formed by black feminists reacting to the failure of mainstream white feminist groups to respond to the racism that black women faced in the United States. In her 2001 essay From the Kennedy Commission to the Combahee Collective, historian and African American Studies professor Duchess Harris states that in 1974, the Boston Collective observed that their vision for social change was more radical than the NBFO, and as a result, the group chose to strike out on their own as the Combahee River Collective. Members of the CRC, notably Barbara Harris and Demetia Fraser, felt it was critical that the organization address the needs of black lesbians in addition to organizing on behalf of black feminists. The collective's name was suggested by Smith, who owned a book called Harriet Tubman, Conductor of the Underground Railroad by Earl Conrad. She wanted to name the collective after a historical event that was meaningful to African American women. Smith noted it was a way of talking about ourselves being on a continuum of black struggle and of black women's struggle. The name commemorated an action at the Combahee River planned and led by Harriet Tubman on June 2nd, 1863 in the Port Royal region of South Carolina. The action freed more than 750 slaves and is the only military action in American history planned and led by a woman. The Combahee River Collective statement was developed by a collective of black feminists involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics while doing political work within our own group and in coalition with other progressive organizations and movements. Members of the collective described having a feeling of creating something which had not existed previously. Demetia Fraser described the CRC's beginnings as not a mixed cake, meaning that the women involved had to create the meaning and the purposes of the group from scratch. I hear that. In her 1995 essay, Doing It From Scratch, The Challenge of Black Lesbian Organizing, which borrows its title from Fraser's statement, Barbara Smith describes the early activities of the collective as consciousness raising. So consciousness raising is a form of activism popularized by U.S. feminists in the late 1960s. It often takes the form of a group of people attempting to focus the attention of a wider group on some cause or condition. Common issues include diseases, breast cancer or AIDS, conflicts, the Darfur genocide, global warming, or right now, the pandemic, or this conflict with current conflict with Russia and Ukraine. Global warming movements, Greenpeace, PETA, and Earth Hour, and political parties or politicians, since informing the populace of a public concern is often regarded as the first step in changing how the institutions handle it. Raising awareness is often the first activity in any advocacy group engages. So Barbara Smith describes the early activities as consciousness raising, but also political work on a multitude of issues, along with the building of friendship networks, community, and a rich black woman's culture where none had existed before. The CRC sought to address the failures of organizations like the NBFO and build a collective statement to enable the analysis of capitalism's oppression of black women, while calling for society to be reorganized based on the collective needs of those who it most oppresses. This is not an academic exercise. Rather, the CRC sought to create a mechanism for black women to engage in politics. The catalyst for this engagement were the failures of organizations like the NBFO to successfully address the oppression of black women the oppression that black women faced on issues like sterilization, sexual assault, labor rights, and workplace rights. This alienation, and I'm going to make another plug for Black Like Me. And the reason that I'm going to make another plug is because the portion of the book that I wound up listening to this weekend, I talked yesterday about Bombshell, the movie Bombshell, and also the docu-series about Hugh Hefner, Secrets of Playboy, because of the whole issue of sexual harassment. Many people, and this is unfortunately a thing of a byproduct of the strong black woman trope, have a tendency to believe that black women can't be coerced or sexually harassed, and that's completely not true. I did an article summary back during my undergrad, and it talks about it. I wound up making a blog post on I think it might be Sex, Food, and Family, but the whole issue was racist tropes within rape culture, and how it gives a racial breakdown of sexual assaults. And so you hear the whole thing about the black rapist, and Donald Trump used the Mexican rapist to get in office. What you never hear about is the white rapist. And white men have the majority of women who are sexually assaulted in this country, those who report, because it is also a very underreported crime, actually are more in danger from men their own ethnicity. However, when you do the breakdown, white men have higher stats for raping women of color or black women than men of color have for raping white women. It's not just like a tidge higher. It's not, but it's still higher. And like I said before, when you're talking, especially during some of these time periods, because the further you go back, the more you recognize that a lot of women of color, and especially black women, had no sexual agency over their whole body because of the whole issue of power imbalance. And and as our protagonist in Black Like Me is talking to a white man admits to him about sexually harassing black women, and says every one of them that works for me has had to give it up or not have a job. So it's something to think about. Okay. And workplace rights. This alienation, as well as the domination of the Black liberation movement by black men, led to members of the CRC to reimagine a politics that engaged these issues. So, writing the statement throughout the mid '70s, members of the CRC met weekly at the Women's Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The collective held retreats throughout the Northeast between 1977 and 1979 to discuss the issues of concern to black feminists. Author Alexis DeVoe, biographer of poet Audre Lorde, described a goal of the retreats to institutionalize black feminism and develop an ideological separation from white feminism, as well as discuss the limitations of white feminist fixation on the primacy of gender as oppression. The first black feminist retreat was held July 1977 in South Hadley, Massachusetts, and its purpose was to address the state of the movement and to share information about the participants' political work and to talk about possibilities and issues for organizing black women. 20 black feminists were invited and were asked to bring copies of any written materials relevant to black feminism, articles, pamphlets, papers, and their own creative work to share with the group. Fraser, Smith, and Smith, who organized the retreats, hoped that they could foster political stimulation and spiritual rejuvenation. The second retreat was held November 1977 in Franklin Township, New Jersey, and the third and fourth were scheduled for March and July 1978. After these retreats occurred, the participants were encouraged to write articles for the Third World Women's issue of Conditions, a journal edited by Lorraine Bethel and Barbara Smith. The importance of publishing, let me see here. Okay. The importance of publishing was also emphasized on the fifth retreat held July 1979, and the collective discussed contributing articles for a lesbian her story issue of two journals, Heresies and Frontiers. Participation in these participants at these six retreats discussed articles in the May-June issue of the Black Scholar, collectively titled The Black Sexism Debate. They also discussed the importance of writing to Essence magazine, to support an article in the September 1979 issue entitled I Am a Lesbian by Shirlane McCrae, who was a Combahee member. And the seventh retreat was held in Washington, D.C. in February 1980. The final statement was based on this collective discussion and drafted by African American activists Barbara Smith, Demita Frazier, and Beverly Smith. The Combahee River Collective statement was separated into 4 separate chapters: the genesis of contemporary black feminism, what we believe, problems in organizing black feminists, and black feminist issues and projects. So I'm going to go a little bit into each chapter to give a little bit of insight. So the genesis of contemporary black feminism. I didn't really get a chance to talk about black feminism during Black History Month, but I will. You will get a definition of the different types of feminism as I go into this chapter of global. So the genesis of contemporary black feminist. The genesis of contemporary black feminism chapter of the CRC statement traces the origin and trajectory of black feminism. This chapter serves to situate the CRC within the larger black feminist movement. The CRC presented themselves as rooted in the historical activism of Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frances E.W. Harper, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Mary Church Terrell. And I believe I talked about them, and if I haven't, their mention is coming. As well as many unknown activists who have shared an awareness of how their sexual identity combined with their racial identity to make their whole life situation and the focus of their political struggles unique. The CRC framed contemporary black feminism as a genesis built upon the work of these activists. The black feminist presence in the larger second wave American feminist movement resulted in the formation of separate feminist groups such as the National Black Feminist Organization, or the NBFO, as the needs of black feminists were not being met by mainstream organizations. The CRC also stated that it was the involvement of black feminists in the black liberation movement of the 60s and 70s which impacted CRC members' ideology and led to disillusionment with these movements. This chapter also introduced the CRC's belief that the oppression that black women endured was rooted in interlocking oppressions. As black women, the collective argued that they experienced oppression based on race, gender, and class, which is true. Further, because many of the women were lesbians, they also acknowledge oppression based on sexuality as well. I would suggest a fictional reading, Women of Brewster Place, and only because in Women of Brewster Place, if you saw the movie, then you know Lynette McGee, as well as Paula Kelly played a lesbian couple in there, and the one was sexually assaulted because of a man who felt really, really threatened by a woman who wasn't sleeping with a man. Tripped out. But I recommend it. There's also a book called Ruby. I think the name is Ruby, and not the black exploitation movie where she's possessed by the devil, but it's also another book called Ruby. I happened to read it, and it's a very good book, and it basically talks about the whole issue of two girls winding up in a relationship. It was different. So the collective stated its basis and active goals as committed to struggling against racial, sexual, and heterosexual class oppression, and describe their particular tasks as the development of integrated analysis and practice based on the fact that the major systems of oppression were interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. And so the next session is what they believe. So the what we believe chapter of the CRC statement details their definition of identity politics and how it functions, and what the CRC believe by the term identity politics is that black women had a right to formulate their own agenda based on the material conditions they faced as a result of race, class, gender, and sexuality. So here recently, I had been posting on Facebook, and so I was posting some of the different statements. I'm going to grab a Funyun here. I was talking about the different statements that I have heard in reaction, and these were for church men, to me saving sex for marriage. So I'm practicing abstinence. I won't be having sex again until I'm legally married to someone. And when you're not sexually active, it's amazing the opinions that people share with you that you didn't ask for. Now, some people, like, I can remember before I got saved and started really, really getting into Christ, and the times that I didn't feel like it was realistic because, I was of the world. So I thought as the world thought. I thought as a secular person. And so, but the intrusiveness of some people, even in church, I had someone say to me, well, you just afraid of what other people will think because I'm not, because they tried to get me to do some stuff that was wrong. And I started making up these Facebook posts, and I said, and the post consists of things that people have said to me in result to me saving it, and then put equals my fragile male ego is, how did I say that? My fragile male ego cannot handle that you are a free moral agent that has the right and ability to make your own decisions about when sex should enter your life. Because that's basically how each of these people, especially these men, were coming across. Because, yeah, I need your permission to do what God already says that I'm supposed to be doing anyway. And it's amazing how many people, male, female, I had to get into it with a fellow feminist. Because I said I believe sex is for marriage only, and she came for me. And I had this one guy laughing because I was like, well, first of all, it's my coochie, and I have a right to do what I want with it. So male patriarchy and all of that other stuff you talking has nothing to do with the decision that I made about not giving it to anybody that isn't committed to me. And so the lady kept going on. It kept coming for me. And another person that was sensitive to my plight was like, why are you coming for her? This is her own decision. And it's an informed decision. It's not a societal one. It's not because I was spit shine and sat on a pew every Sunday and taught. It's not about me saving it for some imaginary guy. Because I'm worried about what some guy will think about me giving myself to another guy. I didn't care about that when I was fornicating. Okay? Didn't care about none of that, because if men were so concerned about your numbers, why are you constantly trying to add to them? So I think it's real hypocritical to criticize women's numbers, but be one of the main ones, bugging them and haranguing them for sex all the time. Very hypocritical. So let me go ahead and finish this little section. So the CRC identified as socialists and believed that work must be organized for the collective benefit of all people. Okay, wait a minute. I skipped a line. So let me get to this one quote. We realize that the only people who care enough about us to work consistently for our liberation are us. Our politics evolved from a healthy love for ourselves, our sisterhood, and our community, which allows us to continue our struggle and work. So this chapter also details the CRC's belief that the destruction of capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy is necessary for the liberation of oppressed people. The CRC identifies as socialist and believes that all work must be organized for the collective benefit of all people, not just for the benefit of profit. To this end, the CRC was in agreement with Marxist theory as it applied to the material economic relationships he analyzed. The CRC did not advocate for lesbian separationism, as they felt it left out others who were valuable to the movement. So one of the reasons that I'm not, if a person, out of my notables, that I'm not rooting them out is because we're talking about feminism and we're talking about people who have been integral to the fight for women's rights. So now the next one, problems in organizing black feminists. So this chapter traced the problems and failures surrounding organizing around black feminism. The CRC believed that the fact that they were fighting to end multiple forms of oppression simultaneously, rather than just one form of oppression, was a major source of difficulty. The CRC also believed that because of their positions as black lesbian women, that they did not have access to racial, sexual, heterosexual, or class privilege to rely on. The CRC believed that they experienced the psychological toll of their fight differently because of the low value placed on black women's psyches in this society. In this view, the members of the CRC saw themselves as being at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Because of this positioning, the CRC wrote that if black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, because our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. Their belief in this statement also relies on their previous contention that the liberation of all people will be delivered with the destruction of capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy. The CRC's focus on the liberation of black women also led to negative reactions from black men. The CRC believed that because of this focus, black men felt like they might also be forced to change their habitually sexist ways of interacting and oppressing black women. This reaction of black men also proved problematic in organizing black feminists. So I can see that because many times, especially when we may be talking about men from a very spiritual background, that may be very, very resistant to having their wives and girlfriends doing anything that they feel like might get them out of place. And so the last chapter is about black feminist projects and issues. So this final chapter demonstrated that they were committed to making the lives of all women, third world, and working people better. The CRC stated, "We are of course committed to working to bettering those struggles which race, sex, and class are simultaneous in factors in oppression." The chapter details how this may look in various types of application around the world. This chapter also detailed how the CRC had started working publicly to address the racism inherent in the white women's movement. The CRC believed that white women involved in the feminist movement had made very little effort to combat or understand their own racism. Moreover, the CRC believed that these women must have a more than superficial comprehension of race, color, and black history and culture. While the CRC acknowledged that this work was the responsibility of white women, they would work by demanding accountability of these white women toward this end. So now the impact. So the CRC is referred to as one of the most compelling documents produced by Black feminists. And Harriet Sigerman, author of the Columbia documentary history of of American women since 1941, calls the solutions which the statement proposes to societal problems as let me read that again. So Harriet Sigerman, author of the Columbia documentary history of American women since 1941, calls the solutions which the statement proposes to societal problems such as racial and sexual discrimination, homophobia, and classist politics multifaceted and interconnected. In their Encyclopedia of Government and Politics, M.E. Hawksworth and Maurice Kogan refer to the CRC as what is often seen as the definitive statement regarding the importance of identity politics, particularly for people whose identity is marked by multiple interlocking oppressions. Okay, I just clicked onto it, so it kind of takes us back to intersectionality. So much of what the CRC contributed politically has been taken for granted by feminist politics. Smith and the Combahee River Collective have been credited with coining the term identity politics, which they define as a politics that grew out of our objective material experiences as Black women. In her essay From the Kennedy Commission to the Combahee Collective, Black Feminist Organizing, 1960 to 1980, Duchess Harris credits the polyvocal political expressions of the Black feminists in the CRC with defining the nature of identity politics in the 1980s and 90s and challenging earlier essential appeals and doctrines. While the CRC did not coin the term intersectionality, so intersectionality was coined by feminist author Kimberly Crenshaw. Okay. Another lady, and I will be talking about her this month, coined respectability politics. So if you wonder where I get the term when I talk about how respectability, when I do the respectability politics series for my blog, and I talk about how it kills Black women, that's I got that term from another author, and I'll be talking about her this month as well. The collective developed a multi-dimensional analysis recognizing a simultaneity of oppressions, refusing to rank oppressions based on race, class, and gender. According to author and academic Angela Davis, which I had already talked about her earlier, this analysis drew on earlier Black Marxist and Black nationalist movements and was anti-racist and anti-capitalist in nature. And Roderick Ferguson's book, Aberrations in Black, the Combahee River Collective statement is cited as rearticulating coalition to address gender, racial, and sexual dominance as part of capitalist expansion globally. Ferguson uses the articulation of simultaneity of oppressions to describe coalition building that exists outside of the organizations of the nation state. Other political work, in the encyclopedia Lesbian Histories and Cultures, contributing editor Jamie M. Grant contextualized the CRC's work and the political trends of the time. The collective came together at a time when many of its members were struggling to define a liberating feminist practice alongside the ascending of a predominantly white feminist movement and a black nationalist vision of black women deferring to black male leadership. Grant believes the CRC was important within the emergence of coalition politics since the late 70s and early 80s, which demonstrated the key role that progressive feminists of color can play in bridging gaps between diverse constituency while also creating other possibilities for change with deeply divided communities. She notes that in addition to penning the statement, collective members were active in the struggle for desegregation of the Boston public schools and community campaigns against police brutality in black neighborhoods and on picket lines demanding construction jobs for black workers. The collective was also politically active around issues of violence against women, particularly the murder of 12 black women and one white woman in Boston in 1979. According to Becky Thompson, associate professor at Simmons University in Boston and author of A Promise and Way of Life, White Anti-Racist Activism, the Boston Police Department and the media attempted to dismiss the murders, based on the notion that the women were alleged to be prostitutes and therefore not worthy of protection or investigation. So you've heard of a police term called no human involved. Okay? And it's usually to describe prostitutes or homeless or anybody that, is sort of what they call the dregs of society. So one of the reasons I recommend the YouTube channel Soft White Underbelly is because he puts a human face on those who we would call the dregs of society and kind of gives you some background into how these people got to where they are. Because there's always a why behind the what. So that winter and spring were a time of demoralization, anger, and sadness for many black women in Boston, including myself. It was also a time of some of the most intensive, meaningful political organizing I've ever done. The Black feminist political analysis and practice of the Combahee River Collective had developed since 1974. When I say me, this is a quote. And enabled us to grasp both the sexual political and racial political implications of the murders, and positioned us to be in the link between various communities that were outraged. Black people, especially black women and other women of color, and white feminists, and many of who were also lesbians. So this was a quote by Barbara Smith. Smith developed these ideas into a pamphlet on the topic, articulating the need to look at these murders as both racist and sexist crimes, and emphasizing the need to talk about violence against women and the black community. Now, there was another time where this was brought up. If you have ever looked at any information about the Grim Sleeper. So the Grim Sleeper, I would have to look him up and find out his time period of operation, but he was a black serial killer, and he mainly killed prostitutes. Most of his victims were black women, and many of them what they call sex workers or prostitutes. So so many of them, like I said before, they tend to play down. They tend to play down black women as it is, which I think is horrible, or women of color. But then you hear that they're sex workers, so they really don't pay attention. And the thing of it is people who do dangerous crimes like that don't just stay within those people. And it tells you right then that, we're not learning that all human lives are important. I remember when the whole Jeffrey Dahmer, when they, were pulling people, bodies and everything out of his apartment, and there was some black women on screen that were crying. And I was like, and they were crying, and they showed the pictures of the victims, and they said they remembered. She said, we get criticized for not getting involved. She said, but I remember the one victim, because I remember he was running through the streets bleeding and naked, and they called the police, and the police sent him back into Jeffrey Dahmer's house to be murdered. Okay, which unfortunately used to happen with a lot of battered women. Okay, all Jeffrey Dahmer had to do was give him a lame explanation like, we're lovers and we've had a spat, and the kid was 13 or 14 years old, so he was severely underage. So, and they talked about how the police were kind of joking afterwards or whatever, and he only got away with it because, number one, they were racist, but also number two, they were very, very homophobic. They didn't understand, that it's not normal for anybody to be naked and bleeding and running through the streets, regardless of what kind of relationship they had with the person that they were fighting with. Okay. So historian Duchess Harris believes that the collective was most cohesive and active when the murders in Boston were occurring. Having an event to respond to and collectively organize gave them a cause to focus on. So the importance of black women's liberation. The CRC emphasized that a fundamental and shared belief that black women are inherently valuable, that their liberation is a necessity and not an adjunct to someone else's, but because of their own need as human persons for autonomy, and express a particular commitment to working on those struggles which race, sex, and class are simultaneous in oppression. The CRC fought to build a politics that will change our lives inevitably and end our oppression. The importance of black feminism. The group saw black feminism as the logical political movement to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions that all women of color face, and believed that the most profound and potentially radical politics come out of our own identity. The statement describes contemporary black feminism as the outgrowth of countless generations of personal sacrifice, militancy, and work by our mothers and sisters. And we're going to say these names again: Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frances E.W. Harper, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Mary Church Terrell, as well as thousands upon thousands of unknown women. The work of these women has been observed by outside reactionaries and racism and elitism within the feminist movement. The collective held their last network retreat in 1980 and disbanded sometime that year. I wonder what made them disband. Okay, and so there's a thing, if you want to look for collective members, you can see them in Wikipedia. Okay. Kitchen table color of women press. Okay. Okay. So I was just clicking on some links that under the See Also section. Uh, on Wikipedia. So I am going to be doing the next 3 podcasts that I record are going to be for the women that started the collective, Miss Barbara Smith, Beverly Smith, and Tamita Frazier. I'm going to go ahead and discuss them. I'll be recording again as you can hear. Our public service workers are very busy outside. So yeah, you're hearing some sirens here. So I'm gonna go ahead and hop off here. I've also been looking at. I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I've been looking at the last season of Insecure. So many of you know that this was the last season for it, and so I'm just now starting to binge watch the last season. It's actually a really good show. I've been able to pop in and out of it in prior seasons, and so the last 3 seasons I think I made a more concerted effort to watch, and it's actually a very entertaining show. That she pops on a whole lot of contemporary, a lot of issues that a lot of contemporary black people in the age group that they look like they might be in about the 30s or 40s, trying to be established, adulting as a lot of people call it, and so it's been really good. I think I'm going to binge watch another, and you know, it's a little late in the game to do any reviewing on on Insecure, but it's actually been a very good show. They talk about a whole lot of little topics for discussion, and she's done a really good job. I follow Issa Rae on YouTube. I think she's doing something now, you know, getting together black people in entertainment, and comedy and different other stuff. I'll have more information on the collective that she's putting together a little later on, probably even later on in the week. So, but I'm going to go ahead and get off here because I have about 2 or 3 more podcasts that I need to put together so that I can round to continue to keep this work going. So you guys have a good one, and I will be talking to you with the next recording. Be blessed. Hello, you have reached the message line for Adam's Rib Media Ministry. If you would like to give me a shout out, recommend some topics for discussion, or give an opinion about a topic I've already discussed, either on my blogs or here on my podcast, leave a message and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.